G'day, Pastor Blake here. Thanks so much for watching this message today. I pray that this sermon and resource would help grow you in your relationship with Jesus, also in conjunction with a local church. If you have any questions about our church, you can head to our website, devonportcoc.com.au. Again, thanks for watching this message today, and I do hope that it blesses you in your love and devotion towards Jesus Christ.
Once upon a time, there was a woman who was married to an annoying man, and he would complain about everything. One day he went to the creek with his mule, and he complained so much that the mule got annoyed and kicked him to death. Well, at the funeral, when all the men walked by the wife, she shook her head yes. And every time the women walked by, she shook her head no. And the minister asked, why are you shaking your head yes for men and no for the women? And her response was, well, when the men walked by, the men would say how sorry they felt for me, and I was saying, yes, I'll be all right. And when the women walked by, they were asking if the mule was for sale. So we're kicking off a brand new 4-week series today called The Seasons of Life. I thought that would work, that one. Especially for the ladies, maybe. We're kicking off a short 4-week series called The Seasons of Life, and over the next month, we're going to cover topics of singleness, which is next week, retirement, empty nesters, and today, obviously, marriage. Life is full of seasons, and God calls us to do all the seasons well in our lives. As I've said many times this year because of our theme, there are always lessons to be learnt in every season of our lives. Every season of our lives that God orchestrates. How inspiring was the interview with Glenn and Ruth? Wow, married for 57 years. Why don't we just give them a round of applause in Perth? Yeah? And obviously we honoured them last week, but what a great example for all of us who are married to follow, and even if we're not married to look up to. And it's a great example, and I think it's fitting that this is the topic today because this afternoon I'm commencing pre-marriage counselling with Sophie and Daniel, and so this is at the forefront of my mind. For those who are married here, I want you to take some time right now to think back to your wedding day. I want you to take some time right now to think back, if you can remember, back to your wedding day and back to that precious moment when you were both standing at the altar and shared your vows. Do you remember the part that said for better and for worse? And the question that I want to just ask us all today is, how many of you on that day really considered the for worse part on your wedding day? I think for most of us, we were probably thinking about the reception and maybe the wedding night, but many of us were not. I'd like to suggest that very few of us were actually considering the for worse part. You repeated it, but you never really considered it on the day. Why? Well, because this is your wedding day, isn't it? This is your wedding day full of joy and happiness and anticipation and definitely maybe some naivety. The for better was certainly on your mind, but the for worse part probably wasn't. And anybody who is married here today knows that just as there are many for better seasons in a marriage, there are also times when there are for worse seasons. Every relationship has its difficulties. Every relationship has its difficult times. And over the years, there are varying different life events and scenarios that can plunge a marriage relationship into a new season, even a winter season. Things like the birth of a baby, the death of a loved one, illness, losing a job, the demands of a job, financial ups and downs, moving, staying, depression, moods, teenagers, habits, hobbies, sex, impotence, and maybe even infidelity. And all of these different scenarios can put pressure on a marriage, and they all demand a response. And I'm hoping that at the end of this message, those of us who are married, preparing to be married, or desiring one day to be, that this might be helpful. Because building a marriage is hard work. And I just want to say that I realise that as I preach this message today, that there are some in the room where marriage has not worked out the way that you'd hoped. And it's ended in pain. I just want to be upfront about that today. And I also acknowledge in the room, as I did at the first service, that there are actually widows and widowers in the room today. And so we think about their marriages as well today. But let's head to the classic text by the Apostle Paul, used at many wedding ceremonies. So what do you do and what should you know in all seasons of marriage? Well, 1 Corinthians, that famous chapter, 1 Corinthians 13 verses 4 to 8 says this: love is patient and love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. The first thing that I think we all need to know in all seasons of marriage is that love is a choice. Love is a choice. Love is a decision. Like the puppy love stage of being a newlywed can change really quickly after having children, and often familiarity breeds contempt. The person's always around, they become part of the furniture, and there are so many times when the high road of a marriage is knowing that love is a choice. That love is not a feeling, that love is a decision, and that love never fails. Your spouse has most likely already learned the lesson that love is choosing to love a selfish person. Like when you said your vows, you gave away your life that day and released the right to live the rest of your life for yourself. But when a husband puts his interests and his desires and priorities ahead of his wife, he is flying a flag of his own selfishness. When a wife constantly complains about the time and energy she spends meeting the needs of her husband, she's revealing her selfishness. And the bottom line is that you either make decisions of love for others or love for yourself. And we all know that because we've all done both. Verse 5 says that love is not self-seeking. It does not seek its own. Like choosing to love your spouse will cause you to say no to what you want so you can say yes to what they need. Like the people who are most closest to me in my life know that selfish people are hard work. Unselfish people are a perpetual delight. And no matter what the season you are in your marriage today, love is a choice. Always. Philippians chapter 2 verse 3 says, "Do nothing from selfish or empty conceit, but with humility of mind regard one another as more important than yourselves." And there are two other aspects of love that are vital in every season of a marriage. And I'm sure for many men here, we would like to learn this lesson earlier on. But there are two aspects. If love is a choice, then it's built upon two major pillars. And those pillars are patience and kindness. All other characteristics of love are extensions of these two pillars. Like love inspires you to become a patient person. And when you choose to be patient, you respond in a positive way to a negative situation. Because patience is a choice to control your emotions rather than allowing your emotions to control you. And if your spouse offends you, do you quickly retaliate or do you stay under control? Kindness is love in action. If patience is how love reacts in order to minimize a negative circumstance, kindness is how love acts to maximize a positive circumstance. Husbands, love makes you kind, and surprise, surprise, kindness makes you likable. In fact, kindness makes you likable in every relationship that you have in life. It is difficult to demonstrate love when you feel like little to no motivation. But love is, in its truest sense, is not based on feelings. Rather, love chooses to show thoughtful actions even when there seems to be no reward. Love chooses patience and kindness in every season to the best of our ability through the grace and goodness of God only. So the first thing that we need to understand in all seasons of marriage is that love is a choice. The second thing we need to understand is that God is growing you up. Just like the natural seasons are used by nature to grow plants and flowers, marriage can also follow the four natural seasons. Let's talk about spring. We're in spring at the moment. Who loves spring? Yeah. Because spring leads to spring. The relationship feels new and exciting. You know the butterflies? Those feelings, your heart races. Couples are attracted to each other and want to spend time together. It's also a season where a couple is sowing seeds for what the relationship will look like in years to come. Then there's summer. The relationship heats up. Feelings are strong and couples reveal more of who they are. It's also a time where they begin experiencing emotional, physical, and spiritual intimacy. Then there's autumn, and this is a time for practicing vulnerability, learning how to handle conflict and improving communication. And as leaves change from green to orange and to yellow, autumn reveals the true colours of a person's character. It's in the autumn season where people come face to face with their spouse's faults and go, oh, that's what he's like. Oh, that's what she's like. And autumn reveals the spouse's faults and quirks. And then there's the season of winter. And the warm feelings of the other seasons have cooled and the chill of normalcy settles in, and it's a difficult season. It can be a time when people's roots grow deep and where people grow up. And it can be a time where spouses grow roots or put up walls of resentment and apathy toward each other. So you can grow roots in a season of winter in your marriage or build walls. Because marriage, and we'll talk about this, Daniel and Sophie, marriage, I think, is a lifelong classroom in growing up and becoming less selfish. Like if you don't want to grow up, you have no business being married. If you don't want to grow up, you have no business being at the marriage altar. And God will use all of the above seasons to ensure that happens. Because you just don't grow in spring and summer. Man, I'm praying those plants out the front there are going to grow in spring, Bruce. I'm believing they've got faith. But you know my lack of gardening skills, but I do know that even in seasons of winter, even though it looks dormant, something is still happening. That something can still happen. That something is being renewed and regenerated underneath the surface. A winter season in marriage can do the same if you let it. And I think, what is God trying to teach you in the varying different seasons of a marriage? Like I'm going to say this morning, because I know this myself, 10 times out of 10, it will always be about growing you into Christ-likeness and dying to self. 10 times out of 10. Gary Chapman, who wrote the book, The 5 Love Languages, he wrote a book called The 4 Seasons of Marriage. And he's quoted saying this: "My experience, both in my own marriage and in counselling couples for more than 30 years, suggests that marriages are perpetually in a state of transition, continually moving from one season to another. Perhaps not annually, as in nature, but just as certainly and consistently. The cycle repeats itself many times throughout the life of a marriage." So what do we need to know in the different seasons of marriage? That love is a choice, that God is growing you up. And the next thing we need to know is that marriage does not complete you. In spite of what Hollywood would have us believe, marriage or any other relationship or friendship for that matter does not complete you. Like, think about this. Like, if we believe that, this is what we're saying. You complete me. Like, I was incomplete before I met you. Like, I was only half a person before I met you. But now I am whole because of you. Nah. And if you need a relationship to define your wholeness, this is a big mistake. Tip 1, Sophie and Daniel: marriage does not complete you, Christ completes you. And from a biblical perspective, even though as a married couple you are one flesh, you are still 2 separate individuals with different personalities and different hobbies and interests. And you can't ask a fallen, imperfect partner to complete you or make up for your insecurities. We have all been created by God, and we've all been created in God's image, and He is the only one who can complete us and find ultimate purpose in. And I think sometimes the soulmate, and this is in Christian circles as well, sometimes the soulmate idea can steer us wrongly into thinking marriage exists solely to make us happy. Like who told you that? And then if we believe that, then when we hit bumps in the road, we might be tempted to quit. But in contrast, Christian men and women in marriage are about to enter into a marriage should always look at it realistically, especially in the light of its covenantal aspect. And Gary Thompson says that one common misconception Christians have about marriage is finding a soulmate, someone who can complete us. He says the problem with looking to another human to complete us is that, spiritually speaking, it's idolatry. We are to find our fulfillment and purpose in God. If we expect our spouse to be God to us, he or she will fail every day. No person can live up to such expectations. Only God completes people. People fail other people, and putting another person on such a high pedestal will ultimately lead to disappointment and bitterness. Marriage is not the end goal of the Christian life. Intimacy with God is. Ephesians chapter 5 verses 28 to 33 say, Husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body, just as Christ does the church. For we are members of his body. And for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. And this is a profound mystery, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. However, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. So what's another thing to know in all seasons of marriage? Keep loving and respecting your spouse in every season. Keep loving and respecting your spouse in every season. Paul says that husbands are to show honour for their wives and wives to show respect to their husbands. And this is a fundamental key to the health and strength of your marriage. We are not told by the Apostle Paul to honour our spouse only if they deserve it, but because honouring them is right in God's eyes. Paul doesn't say also to only honour them in a season of spring and summer, but in every season. Because Paul said in 1 Corinthians 13 that love positively acts. It chooses to love and honour even when it's rejected. See, love in a marriage and in all types of seasons says this: of all the relationships I have, I will value ours the most. Of all the people for whom I am willing to sacrifice, I will sacrifice the most for you. With all the failures and sins and mistakes and faults, past and present, I still choose the God-honouring way in every season to love and honour you. The other thing that we all should know in every season of marriage is to seek God in every season of marriage. And do you want to know, I think, what the real key to a healthy and happy marriage, the real key is whether you're at year 7 or year 70, is to pursue something before and above marriage, to pursue something before and above marriage, to pursue someone before and above your spouse. Blessed are the husbands and wives who hunger and thirst most for righteousness, for they shall be faithful, hopeful, and satisfied. Does being married tomorrow feel impossible? Don't worry about tomorrow. Fix your eyes on God today, on his righteousness, the kingdom, his promises, his resources, his spirit, and leave the next 10 or 20 or 50 years to him. Like, God doesn't call us to predict or bear our future troubles. He calls us to bear today's troubles in the grace and strength that he provides for us today. Look at the birds of the air, look at the lilies of the field. And that he will keep your marriage and strengthen your marriage and even beautify your marriage as each of you focus much on seeking him. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. Jesus says, and all these other things will be added unto you. And all of us who are married here today wants the best marriage possible. Like, who doesn't? Have you ever noticed that trying to change your spouse does not work? Nagging doesn't work. Scolding does not work. And do you know what does work and what we should always do in every season? You know what we should do? Because this is the one thing that no one has any defense against, the one thing that no one can stop you doing. You know what it is? Pray. Because prayer really does work. Do you feel like giving up on your marriage? Jesus said to pray instead of quitting. Are you stressed out and worried? Prayer can bring peace to your storm. Do you need a major breakthrough? Prayer can make, the difference. Turn your complaints into prayers and watch the master work. And again, I say this final point, understanding that This point hasn't worked for everybody and hasn't worked because of things like abuse and infidelity and a whole range of other things. So I just premise that with that. However, I don't apologise for saying this to married couples today. Never give up. Never give up. Fighting for your marriage is always worth it, no matter what season you're currently in. Like, just as most people wouldn't lie down in the snow and want to die, like there's no reason to passively accept the coldness of a wintry marriage. There is a way out, and it begins with hope, and it begins with God, and it begins with prayer, and I truly believe that God blesses those who don't quit. It begins with personal reflection. It begins with yourself. You might not be able to change your spouse, but sure as heck you can work on yourself. I truly believe that God blesses those who don't quit. Author Leila Miller, in her book called Impossible Marriages Redeemed, quotes a woman who's been married 43 years as she describes the legacy of intact marriages in her family, including her own. And she said this, she said, in the end, the staying together was better, best, and gratifying, and smart. It's not about happiness. There is a lot of comfort, love, and satisfaction, though, and yes, there is happiness. But that is not the end all be all. Whatever hell we thought we were going through was worth it. We can breathe. We are still together. We feel like warriors. We wear badges with honor. We are married. And King Solomon said these words, when you make a vow to God, do not delay to fulfill it. He has no pleasure in fools. Fulfill your vow. It is better not to make a vow than to make one and not fulfill it. Like a vow or an oath is a promise that is meant to be kept. And being committed and never giving up in a marriage, do you know what? Because ultimately, we're not glorified. Do you know who is glorified in the end? God is glorified. God is glorified. And ultimately, when God is glorified in all seasons of your marriage, and you never give up and you never quit, do you know what that says to the world? And you know what it says to people? It says that God's way is the best. God's way is the best. So, friends, whatever season your marriage is in right now, don't give up, but turn to God and He will give you renewed hope. Amen? Amen.